I went over the engineer tutorial. I've gone over the spy tutorial. I've covered the demo man tutorial. So, what's left? Alright, the soldier.
Yeah.
The soldier is generally considered to be the top pick for new players due to his generalist nature and generous splash damage coming from his rocket launcher, so it's only fair for him to be the first class you have to play if you decide to play the tutorial. So without further ado, it's time for the grand finale of my tutorial review series. Let's go over the soldier tutorial.
Let's go!
As usual, I'll be splitting this video into two parts. First, I'll recap the tutorial and voice any complaints I have. Then, I'll go over a second time and add in my improvements keeping in line with the current system. That means retaining the same maps and text box setup. Alright, let's get started. First up, the tutorial is under Find a Game, Training, then Basic Training. Here, you'll find the soldier tutorial, as well as a tutorial for the demo man, spy, and engineer. You'll have to finish the previous tutorial to unlock the following one, so you'll have to play all of them in order. So, when you start the soldier tutorial, you're greeted with an informational panel, informing the player that the soldier is a generalist capable of dishing out a lot of damage, but has a limited clip size. You'll also see a standard weapon set, that being the rocket launcher, shotgun, and shovel. Starting up the tutorial, you'll be greeted by a video. It claims to be a weapon selection and target practice, which would likely confuse new players as they clicked on this expecting a tutorial. The next slide, where you're told to use the weapons the tutorial tells you to, is also completely useless. The tutorial already forces you to use specific weapons, or else you can't progress. The third slide tells you to reload often during downtime, which doesn't explain anything either, especially since auto reload is enabled by default. Overall, this has got to be the most useless video out of all the tutorials so far. This one doesn't tell you anything of value, you learn nothing about the soldier or his strengths, and puts down your expectations by informing you that this is just target practice. Actually, maybe having lowered expectations is a good thing. Let's brace for more pain and continue with the tutorial. You spawn in not in the regular training spot, but instead in another room a bit away from the target practice area. The tutorial welcomes you and teaches you the basics of a first-person shooter, moving the mouse to look around, then WASD to move. Then you have to make your way to the firing range. Normally, you'd walk down the stairs, but you could also jump over the railing and receive some fall damage. This is a minor thing, but why keep the HUD hidden? The player would know something has happened, but wouldn't know how much damage they've taken thanks to the lack of visual feedback. Next up, you gotta crouch under a half-open door and jump onto a cart before finally making your way to the target practice area. Once you're set up, you're instructed on how to change your weapons. Now, this is less a complaint on the tutorial and more on TF2's default settings, but I can't possibly be the only one who thinks that it's insane that the default way to switch weapons is to highlight the one you want and then press the mouse button to select it, right? This is super slow and a terrible way to switch weapons, especially for a first-person shooter. After that, you're introduced to the last weapon bind, which in my opinion is excessive. Sure, it's nice to teach new players this, but I feel like it's front-loading a lot of smaller bits of information and the player is likely going to forget about it. Personally, I teach the absolute basics first, enough for the player to get used to the game, and then start adding tidbits slowly. Any information you give on early that the player doesn't instantly use is likely going to get lost and forgotten. Alright, time to shoot some targets. Each target that pops up can only be destroyed by a certain weapon. The furthest one can only be destroyed by a rocket launcher, the middle one with the shotgun, and the close one with the shovel. The game also tells you to use the relevant weapon, and if you didn't, you'd find out real quick that using anything other than the intended weapon will not get you anywhere. I get that the game is trying to teach new players that each weapon is good for different ranges, but that's a gross oversimplification. The rocket launcher can still be used at medium ranges, and the shotgun can also be used at short ranges. It can also be used as a fallback for when you run out of primary ammo. Moving on, the tutorial informs you to reload during some downtime, which doesn't really mean much as auto reload is enabled by default. You also don't know how many shots you have loaded in your clip as the HUD is disabled. Once you're reloaded, you're shown how splash damage works, and then you're told to continue shooting at targets. I'm not sure why they decide to go for a second round of wooden targets, maybe because they're trying to pad out the tutorial's runtime or something? Either way, I dislike the target board portion, and a second round is even worse, it doesn't do anything. After that, you're free to do some target practice on some real moving targets. This section is an improvement over the previous parts with the target boards. It's the same, except you're not restricted in which weapon you use at which range, plus you learn to lead your shots with the rocket launcher as the targets can actually move. On top of that, depending on where you land your shots, you can see how your rockets knock targets around. For me, this portion of the tutorial was broken, with the medic bot deciding to hide behind some crates where I couldn't hit him. I've had a few people tell me that other parts of the other tutorials were broken for them too, so I guess this is just some sore spaghetti. Of course, improving the tutorial also means getting rid of these bugs which could softlock a person, because that could just cause a lot more headaches and potentially chase away new players. Once you kill enough enemies, you're kicked back to the main menu. Despite the tutorial having a part 2, you don't get an option to continue. Overall, the part 1 of the tutorial is similar to the Demo Man tutorial, but potentially worse. Yeah, it introduces the basics of shooters such as movement, changing weapons, and shooting, but it extends the target practice way longer than it should be. It's quite bland and doesn't really teach much. Granted, there isn't really much to teach about Soldier's skill set, at least for the basics. But that doesn't mean you get to stretch out the tutorial by repeating 3 target practices. Going back to the tutorial menu, you can see that the Soldier tutorial is listed as 50% completed. That means there is a part 2. Well, let's get to it. You're greeted with another video introducing Dust Bowl. You're shown that this is an attack-defend map with 3 stages, with each stage having 2 points. You capture while standing on the point, and once it's capped, you get more time and the point is locked. Surprisingly, I don't have any complaints about this video. It's actually the best out of all the tutorials. It informs you of all the important information, which is good to know, but not vital to the point where you wouldn't be able to play the tutorial if you didn't watch it. After finishing the video, you're not put into TR target as usual, but instead are thrown into Dust Bowl on the blue team. During the setup time, you get a few boxes explaining how attack defend works, and as you walk around, you'll get pop-ups showing you where the resupply cabinet, spawn gate, and control points are. You have the 60-second setup time to read the text boxes and wander around, which I believe is a bit long. Sure, a new player could use up all this time, but slowing down people who, like me, who don't walk around too much to wait longer is not a very nice thing. Once the setup time is over, the gates open and you follow your teammates out of the main exit and engage in your first battle of TF2. I still don't understand why your HUD isn't showing up. That way you have no idea how much damage you're taking and how close to death you are. It's nice that a small health pack was put outside the point, but it's a bit small in my opinion. A medium health pack would be a bit better as a failsafe in case the player's not too good at the game, considering it is their first time playing. I like this portion where a soldier is waiting around the corner behind the point, as it's a way to teach the player how to corner peek or to use splash damage to injure enemies around corners. In Stage 2, you're introduced to the medic. This is an overly simplistic intro, only informing the player that the medic heals players and can become invincible with his uber charge. Oh, and how to spam E to call for medic.
Medic! 9!
There is no mention of how medic has the ability to overheal the player, nor will the players figure out such a thing as the HUD is still missing. Plus, mentioning how the medic can use uber is nice and all, but the medic bot won't pop uber unless it's at low health itself. As you see later in the video, I die before the medic even pops its uber. This means the information lacks reinforcement, showing the player what they had just learned in practice. One nice thing though, is that the medic follows the player around like a lost puppy, as you can see in the footage. I used the extremely long 60-second setup time to wander around spawn area testing out how the medic follows me. Oh yeah, and same as Stage 1 but worse, the setup time is realistic for the game, but not really fitting for the tutorial as this is just wasted time. If you had more to explain, it would make sense, but not when you have 3 text boxes and then just let the player sit and spawn for 45 seconds. Once the gates open and you fight your way to the point, another issue pops up. As you can see, I died to a pile of stickies. They haven't been introduced to the player so far, so they might not know what they mean and if they're bad or not. Sure, they're team colored, but hoping that that is enough for a player to know what to do around them is wishful thinking. Only once you die, the HUD shows up, allowing the player to see both their health and ammo count. I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but it proves that having the HUD is possible. I'm not sure if this is a nitpick, but personally, I'd expect a new player to have trouble figuring out how to get to the control point. The stairs is inside the building and isn't necessarily visible, and the props can only be crouch jumped up on, which hasn't been taught to the player. In Stage 3, there is no setup time. The moment you walk out of spawn, you're introduced to the engineer. He then takes the teleporter, incentivizing the player to follow him. The moment you take the teleporter, you're greeted with the sight of an engineer nest with a level 3 dispenser and sentry. Some enemies walk in front of the sentry, dying to it, showing off how powerful the sentry is in area denial. When you turn the corner, you're greeted with a sentry of the enemy. The game then instructs you to use the sentry's limited range to your advantage and spam out the gun from a long range. Once the sentry goes down, you cap the point where the rest of your team shows up to help you make the game-winning push, capturing the final point and finishing the second part of the soldier tutorial. So, in summary, the second part of the soldier tutorial is exceptionally well executed in contrast with the bland and boring first part. You actively learn by playing a simulated game of CP, with more elements being slowly introduced one by one. This way you can put learned knowledge into practice right away, which reinforces the learning effect. Of course, I'm most satisfied with the stage 3 section of the tutorial, with the engineer introduction being almost flawlessly introduced in my preferred method of teaching: show, don't tell. You show off how a teleporter is used, how powerful a sentry gun is, as well as its weaknesses. No better way to teach such mechanics. All of this comes together into a giant team effort to push the final point, leading to the climax of the tutorial and a great introduction to Team Fortress 2 as a whole. Besides that, you're also free to play this portion of the tutorial as slow or as quickly as you want. If you're less skilled, you're able to rely on your teammates to back you up, but if you're skilled enough, you can rocket jump ahead and solo the enemy team on your own. This freedom is another aspect of a good tutorial. It's safe enough that a normal player can handle it, but also not restrictive to those who know what they're doing and can learn faster. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to my improvement suggestions. Alright, let's start at the beginning panel. The description is fine, not perfect, but I wouldn't bother to change the text. As mentioned in the previous videos, it would be nice if you could get more information by mousing over each weapon, but I'm unsure if this is possible in the current system. On top of that, having the name of each weapon would be nice. Although one can likely guess what the weapon is by looking at it, it wouldn't hurt to have a small subtitle just to drive that point home. Alright, the soldier introduction video. The original video was completely useless and doesn't teach you anything. How I'd like to use the video is to introduce the player to the tutorial and what to expect from the class. First off, like the Spy Engineer tutorial, I'd like to welcome the player to the soldier tutorial. Then I'd like to introduce the soldier, reiterating what the panel said, but with the visuals to match. Introducing his rocket launcher, his shotgun, and his shovel. Alright, spawning into this room, I'd be alright with retaining the initial instructions of looking and moving, but I'd like to make a change to the room here. Instead of having a staircase, I would just like to have the drop. Maybe we could block it off with a sign or something, forcing the player to walk off the ledge, taking fall damage. When the soldier takes fall damage, the HUD shows up with an arrow pointing towards your now decreased health. The player is then introduced to health kits by telling them to walk over and pick it up, healing them back to full health. You then crouch under the gate, jump over the cart, but then I'd like to add one more obstacle which you have to crouch jump over and introduce that too. Then you're introduced to swapping weapons with the mouse wheel, and then you pull out your shotgun, you shoot a target board which opens the gate to the training area. After which, you're greeted with an ammo pack refill to refill your ammo, and you enter the training area. Oh, and if you're gonna complain about the crummy looking edits to this map, I'm not a mapper and I self-taught this over the course of 2 days. Please cut me some slack, okay? Right, so for the target practice. Personally, I'd like to skip the targets popping up and immediately go to bots. First off, the rocket launcher. Not sure if this is possible in stock TF2, but I saw a video showing off a source mod plugin which displays the blast radius of rockets. This would be nice to have in the tutorial to show off how the blast radius works, at least for the first 4 shots. After that, they won't show up anymore as the player should generally get the idea. The bots should move around, teaching the player to lead their shots with the rocket launcher. This way, the player learns on their own without needing the tutorial to inform them to lead their shots. It's something that a player will inherently pick up on. I'm not sure if this should only be a mention via text box or actually a part of the tutorial, but I'd like to mention aiming at the player's feet to knock them around. Another thing which could be added is a pyro bot and an accompanying pop-up. If the soldier player fires a rocket at it, the pyro will reflect the rocket back. Of course, the bots should occasionally come close to the player, and if they shoot a rocket at that, another pop-up should appear explaining self-damage. Once that is done, the barrier should lower, and you're instructed on how to corner peek a sentry gun. And that's it! This is meant to be an introduction to TF2 as a whole, as well as the basics of Soldier. Since he doesn't have any special beginner strategies beyond corner peeking and using his splash damage, there isn't really much to fill the tutorial with. One final addition I'd like to make to part 1 of the soldier tutorial is adding a continue button to the end screen, allowing the player to immediately start up the second part of the tutorial. Moving on to the second part. The instruction video is actually good to a point where I can't really improve on it anymore. Alright, and before we start, I'm going to exclude any bugs, as those shouldn't be in the game in the first place. Just to reiterate, the HUD was introduced in part 1, and I'd like for it to remain visible for the entirety of part 2 of the tutorial. Alright, for stage 1, when the panel mentioning the timer shows up, I'd like to add some kind of arrow HUD element pointing towards the top where the timer is, just to drive that point home. When you walk up to the gate and the arrow pointing at the control point appears, I'd like to add an outline similar to how the payload cart gets one, just so the player knows where the control point is, as it is inside a building, blocked off from direct line of sight. I'd also like to reduce the setup time from 60 seconds to 30 seconds, the reason being that although it's normal for setup times to be long, this is not a normal game, it's a tutorial, and we don't want players sitting around doing nothing in a tutorial. Also, the friendly fire text box should be moved from after the game starts to before, since there is some downtime then. The final change I'd like to make to stage 1, I'd like to change this health kit and ammo kit to be a medium one instead of small, just to be safe. I mean, it's a minor thing, and there is a large health kit inside the building, but in my opinion, you want to avoid having the player die in the middle of a tutorial, so adding more health kits than necessary would be a decent thing. If you think otherwise, let me know in the comments below why you think that is. Moving on to stage 2. Because the HUD is now visible, the medic's overheal ability is immediately visible to the player. Of course, along with this new information, I'd like to add more information panels, adding a mention of overheal. If possible, I would also think a change to the medic AI would be good. The medics should pop Ubercharge when their target is at low health. As far as I know, currently only medic bots will pop when they're about to die, which is rather odd. If that weren't possible, I would like to add an additional text box informing the player that by using the Z+3 go 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 voice command would also make the medic pop their Uber. Of course, similar to the last stage, I'd like to shorten the setup time, or even remove it outright. Removing the setup time might seem weird, but the bots in training mode apparently don't capture the objective without you standing on them first. They'll just stand nearby and keep spamming the go 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 voice line. Also, a small modification to this part of the map. I'd like to add some arrows pointing towards the capture point. I've got the feeling that newer players might take a little bit longer to figure out how to get to the first point, so a little bit of visual help might make things a bit easier. And finally, the third stage. The existing setup is near perfect, and is a great demonstration of the show don't tell mentality. You show the player how to take a teleporter and how powerful a sentry is. The only thing that is missing is showing how a dispenser heals and replenishes your ammo. So here's my suggestion. One of the bots that walks in front of the sentry is the soldier. Instead of attacking the engineer or a sentry, he should target and hit the player. Injured, the player should head to the dispenser to heal, showing off how it works. Besides that, I have no real complaints. You take out a sentry and cap the first point, which triggers the rest of your team to come in and join you for the climactic push to the final point, bringing an end to the soldier tutorial. Honestly, sometimes I wonder how it would feel if the finale had some kind of dramatic music as you and your team push to the final point. Anyways, those were my suggestions. Feel free to drop your opinions and suggestions down below. I'd love to hear from you. Now before you go, there's a few more things I'd like to mention. The soldier is a good all-rounder with not very much that makes him unique. He's slow but tanky and deals splash damage. Sure, there are a few things that one can learn, like optimally hitting splash damage, corner peeking, air shots and the like, but honestly, those are too specific to include in a basic tutorial. And of course, rocket jumping is a bit of a topic of its own. Possibly one can introduce the basic pencil jump to the soldier, but beyond that it's headed into advanced tutorial territory. Same with market gardening. So yeah, I think that's possibly the reason why the soldier tutorial was made into the basic introduction to the game, with movement and the game functionality playing a larger role than actually learning about the class. Of course, once again, I'd like to thank you guys for the great feedback given on my previous video. I'd love to see more discussion and opinions shared down below, keep it up! And with that, I bring the series Learn to Lose to a close. I've gone over the 4 tutorials included in the base game. Someday, I'd like to come back and make a theoretical tutorial overhaul with 1 tutorial per class, but that'll take some time and a lot of planning to pull off. I'll be taking a break before that happens though. In the meantime, I'll switch to other TF2 related videos. I have a few ideas written down that I'm excited to start working on. So, hope y'all stick around. Until then, stay curious, stay hydrated, see ya!